Welcome back to Main Stage for our closing keynote panel. We hope you enjoyed the sessions. We know it was probably hard to pick which session to attend, so we want to just remind you all sessions were recorded and will be available on this platform until December 15th. After that, Code for America and Digital Service Network will make most sessions available on YouTube.
So our next closing panel is packed with Form thought leaders, and we're so pleased to bring them all together to talk about the future of forms. Our speakers bring unique perspectives from their meaningful work in the US and the UK on form design, user experience research, and process improvement. Please join me in welcoming Caroline Jarrett, Stephanie Wade, and Dana Chisnell to FormFest. And just so you know, our scheduled moderator was not able to join today, so you get more time with Marlena and me. So with that, I'm going to turn it over and we'll get things started.
Welcome everyone to today's closing panel. We're so happy to have you here. We're excited to talk more about the future of forms. So let's get things started by asking our panelists to introduce themselves and share their formative form story. Dana, let's start with you.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for inviting me to do this. There are a few things I love more than talking about forms. My formative form story. First of all, my name is Dana Chisnell. I'm the Executive Director for Customer Experience at the Department of Homeland Security, and I use pronouns she, her, and to give a little visual description, I'm an older white woman with chin-length, brown, graying hair. I wear brown square glasses, and today I have on a black jacket to, I don't know, dress it up a little bit. My formative forms story comes from the presidential election in the United States in 2000. In watching the news coverage of the election returns from Florida and seeing people who were stopped on the way out of the polling place saying to the reporters that they thought that they were not sure that they voted for the person who they thought they wanted to vote for. This put me on a quest of looking at what do ballots look like across the country, and how do elections get done? And that is how I ended up working with county and state election officials for about 20 years and co-founding the Center for Civic Design with Whitney Quisenberry in 2013. And so that ultimately is what put me in the seat in a federal agency in the U.S. So.
Well, we're so happy it did. Caroline, let's go to you.
Oh, hi, I'm Caroline Jarrett. I'm delighted to be here. It's just very exciting to have so many people genuinely interested in forms. And my formative form story is a little older because I got into forms back in 1992. I think Dana is a little bit of a beginner, but she's come along. I know I've known Dana ages, learned so much from her. I know she doesn't mind me saying that kind of thing.
Not at all.
And I'm really looking forward to learning from Stephanie in a minute as well. Very excited about that. But go back to my story. At the time I was a project manager and I knew some things about optical character recognition. I got a job for a computer systems supplier and we were delivering optical character recognition systems powered by what we now call artificial intelligence. The idea was that the tax offices would be able to scan the forms and the artificial intelligence would do all the hard work of typing them in so that the staff didn't have to. And bad news was it didn't really work. And I went and got permission from the tax authority to actually go and look at the forms. And that's when I realized that artificial intelligence in 1992, actually artificial intelligence in 2023 is a lot cheaper, but hasn't changed that much. In those days and today, there isn't anything around that will read a form where someone has written, please read letter attached and deal with it correctly. And so we just had to start doing the hard work to design the forms so that people could fill them in correctly, so that the machine could read them correctly. And that sort of gripped me. I became fascinated and it's just never worn off. I've been fascinated ever since with how do we design forms so that people can fill them in correctly. And cheap and easy to get them.
Well, I have a feeling we'll be digging into AI a little more in today's discussion. Stephanie, let's kick it to you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a great group, and it's going to fly by, I'm sure. So really quickly to introduce myself, Stephanie Wade. I'm the founder and CEO of Ascendant, which is a global innovation consulting firm. I've been working in government innovation for 20 years, and it's absolutely my passion. I built a practice in the private sector, then went over to the lab at OPM in the US federal government, where I was the director of that first design-based innovation lab. And then moved to Bloomberg Philanthropies, where I was the lead for innovation and design, delivering programs to over 400 cities around the world to help them apply best practices in innovation to improve the outcomes for their residents. And now I'm leading my own work, but continue to stay involved at federal, state, and local levels all over the world. My formative form story, and there are many, the one that comes to mind, I think the most formative one, was when I was in the federal government leading the lab. And we were working with the United States Department of Agriculture to improve access to free and reduced lunches for children all over the country. And to understand that even in such a complex and large scale program, how much was driven by that form and how that was a source pain point was absolutely overwhelming and exciting, because we actually were able to create incredible change as a result. So though they may be small in time and in the service delivery aspect for an overall large program, they actually are quite mighty. So it's really fun to dive into those.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing your formative form story. And just for our audience, today really is designed to be a discussion with these three powerful formative minds in the world of forms. And so we're both going to throw some questions out there and have our panelists dive in to see what they have to say. So today, this is our 4th hour of FormFest. So we've talked about forms, for 3 hours leading up to today. We've covered forms in a lot of different ways. But what are some topics around form, design, development, delivery that are overlooked or forgotten? And what are some things that you think governments need to be aware of as they think about forms?
So many possibilities. Something that we run into quite a bit at the Department of Homeland Security is that while there's a big push to put forms online, to put government services online, and more people have access to the internet, bandwidth is not always good or available. This is something that we certainly learned during COVID as kids were trying to go to school online. This problem persists in rural places and places with challenging geographies. And this is not exclusive to the United States, certainly. So disadvantaging some folks because of that lack of access, that kind of access. And also it's safe to say that in places where there's low bandwidth availability, that there probably is low access to humans who could help you too. So even if you make paper forms available in a process for having them, the nearest field office is 50 miles away, 100 miles away, and maybe isn't open all the time, especially if you're looking at sort of rural counties. The clerk may only work 2 days a week too. So you're limited in that way too. So looking at services holistically for people on either end of access availability, I think, is something that we don't necessarily take into account much. Another thing that comes to mind a lot is, what are the second and third order effects of the forms that we're making? And who else is involved in the decisions that go into making those data show up in forms? It is extremely rare that it is one person, one form. It's often family members or friends. We saw this in a study that I worked on with New America in 2020 in the summer, looking at the challenges of folks trying to get unemployment payments during the pandemic. And while we were interviewing individuals, inevitably they were talking about their partners or their parents or their children, helping one another, or assisting somebody who was a neighbor or a friend. And those are all really important considerations in how people access forms, how they fill them out, how they submit the information, how they track what's happening.
Yeah, that's all incredibly interesting. And I'm going to add, so I +1, and I imagine this is going to be the start of every response that we have as we move to each other's conversation. But I +1 to everything Dana said. And what I would add to that, so, I mentioned my formative story was around the USDA and the National School Lunch Program. And what I found as some of the biggest pain points, and again, we don't have enough time to even talk about it, which are much better now. I can say that because they have been improved and the USDA did a great job. But one is just, why are we asking for information? Stopping and saying, we found this when we were going through the application process that was incredibly long, arduous, written at a graduate level language requirement and really inaccessible, was walking through each piece of the form collection and data that was being asked for and saying, like, great, why are you asking for this information? What do you do with it? Mm-hmm. And it was just legacy, oftentimes questions that when we ask the current staff, they're like, we don't do anything with this. We don't even need this. Like, I don't even know where this goes. And so it's like, great. And it's gone. Like that's off the list. Easy to decide, right? And so just again, kind of like that reflection, we have this tendency, especially right now in government and innovation, data, have the data analytics. We have to do cross-departmental assessment of data to do predictive analytics. Great, absolutely. Let's also make sure we stop and ask ourselves why we're asking for these things and if it's actually useful. And to have that reflection because it has a direct experience to the resident and user who's filling out that form. And how do we make sure we're operating responsibly in that regard? And I think secondly is also making sure we're taking cultural norms into account, which is really hard to do when you're operating at a national level. My goodness, in the United States, we are absolutely a melting pot. And we also know at the same time that forms and the way we develop government experiences were done with very specific groups in mind. Mm-hmm. And how do we make sure we're opening that up to build equity? And we saw that in the USDA form, with the school lunch form, that around just even something as simple as the tendencies for certain cultures to have longer names, and that wasn't accommodated for in the form, creating an error and kicking that person out of the ability to get their child a free or reduced lunch when they desperately needed it and qualified for it, right? As something as simple as that, and making sure we're thinking about those different aspects and bringing it into the way that we're designing the service so that we're actually making sure that we're delivering what's supposed to be needed to the people who need it.
I guess clearly I'm nodding along because I think the points that Dana and Stephanie have made are absolutely crucial and spot on. But I also want to point out, I don't know if you can see, but I'm wearing I think you call it a pin in America. Yes. We call it a brooch here. Right. At this time of year in the UK, many of us choose to wear a poppy to honor our veterans and, more importantly, to recognize the horrors of war. I'm sorry if that's triggering for anyone at the moment, but I particularly wanted to wear this pin because this particular one commemorates one of the code breakers, mostly women, at Bletchley Park. And Bletchley Park is very close to where I live. And I'm really so thrilled that we're all here and really digging into forms and sharing all our knowledge internationally. And, it's been absolutely fantastic, the presentations I've heard and the excitement around it. And I think over 1,000 people registered, and that's fantastic. And we're all looking at government forms. And I want to mention Bletchley Park because last week there was a government summit in the UK at Bletchley Park. Okay, so we've attracted international interest, and it's amazing. That summit on artificial intelligence attracted one or two famous people. Our Prime Minister, some guy called Musk. Have we ever heard of him? The press were queuing Where's our press queuing? And yet all of that stuff, it's like all of those new shiny toys gets a huge amount of attention. Our world of forms, we're fascinated by it. We understand the costs. We understand the enormous impact on people's lives, on, if I'm more political about it, the success and effectiveness of a government policy. Where are the cameras coming to queue up and be excited about this? So I think, to me, your question originally was, what are we overlooking in forms? And I'm going to say the forms. We're not paying attention. The challenge is, how do we create, amplify the level of enthusiasm and excitement and brilliance that I've been hearing today? How do we get other people across government to be just as thrilled about, how actually quite small, inexpensive changes can create huge cost savings, huge improvements in policy? That's the part that I find just honestly bewildering. It's like, I can save you hundreds of thousands of pounds if you'd only just let me work on your forms. And like, nah, go away. We want to do artificial intelligence instead. Okay. Well, actually, get back to the forms.
Well, Caroline, to your point, let's double click on forms. Let's talk a little bit about innovation in forms. In today's opening keynote, Nina talked a lot about the innovations that she's seen. So if you all had a crystal ball and could look into the future, we'd love to know, what do forms look like in, say, the year 2030 or the year 2054?
What do you think, Caroline?
Well, obviously, artificial intelligence is going to mean that everything is done by telepathy with a robot that magically plucks. I don't know. I mean, one of my most loved forms books is called The Design of Forms in Government Departments, and it came out in 1962, I think. Someone in the UK, a chap called Nick Colley, who put it online for us all, which is really convenient, so you don't have to track down one of the very few paper copies. And yeah, some of the technology is a little out of date in there. There's a lot about typewriter spacing, and nobody really fills in forms with typewriters anymore. But a lot of the questions that they suggest that we ask are the questions that we're asking today, and I think we'll be asking in 30 years' time, like the one that Stephanie put. Who's using this answer? Who is actually using this answer? Does the question we ask to elicit that answer actually make sense to the person who's answering it? Those are things that were true in 62, and I think they'll still be true in another 30, 40, 50 years. I can't do arithmetic, but some of the stuff is still about people and about, again, going back to our keynote this morning, creating conversations between our organizations and the people who work in them, and the people who are on the outside and have to get something done. So I've asked the question about the future by referring to the past, but I'm interested to hear if anyone else is a bit more forward-looking.
All this has happened before. All this will happen again.
Well, I'm definitely been thinking about this in terms of your original robot telepathy thing, right? I don't know if any of you've had the extraordinary privilege to go to the Museum of the Future in Dubai, but many, many years ago, I got to go, and the technology that was already being built that integrates our biology seamlessly into services and social and human experiences is actually quite jarring, I would say. And while that isn't mainstream, we all know that technology is going to move quickly. And I think there's an opportunity to work both on the side of safeguarding privacy, because I think that's going to become increasingly challenging. Because right now, there's the silo of I go to a doctor, I fill out a form, that doctor has that information. I go to my dentist, I have to fill it out again. They have their certain information, right? And it's compartmentalized, and all my data, if I'm asked for my date of birth one more time, I just don't know what I'm going to do with myself. And I keep wondering, like, why does my dentist need, and I know the answer to this. I'm an educated person, but I have moments where it's like, stop asking me these things. I don't think everybody needs to know this, given that it unlocks so many other privacy issues. And so I think what I'm getting at is it would be wonderful if instead of my computer owning my cookies, that I owned my cookies, right? That I actually had my auto population of information that I had come to determine what I'm okay with releasing. And I authorize a trusted user to be able to kind of move into the cloud and seamlessly collect that data. So I'm not involved anymore, but I am the owner of that somehow in some sort of, I don't know, alternative technology state. I'm not sure if that's a chip in my body or if that's something app on my Apple Watch. Like, I don't know yet. But I think it's where I am the user, I am the owner, and that it uploads seamlessly to some sort of universal design where there's pattern affordance, meaning, the way that information is collected and how it is asked, I have authorized that's how it's going to be used and how it's asked. And the technology makes it seamlessly work so that I don't have to do the work. Somewhere in that field where I'm just not the one doing all the work all the time, but I have control over that data and safety, and what I have goes with me in that technology universe, my alternative virtual self, whatever that becomes.
I love your utopian ideal on that. I work in a space where people come from other countries and they don't trust their government. And so as the potential repository of all that personal data, I have a massive responsibility that I'm probably not ready for yet, right? Like, so at least in the US government, safeguarding personally identifying information is a huge challenge. Sharing data appropriately across government agencies, there are actually laws against doing that in many cases for reasons of protecting the public. So I think we have some cultural shifts to go through on the way to getting to a place where there's far less burden on the public to get to a world where I'm not actually having to fill out forms all of the time. And it's not just like automatically populating forms, but seeing proactively what a need is, or having some kind of a conversation that's not actually supplying basic information and looking more across the life experience enhanced by whatever technology exists. But what I am watching now and for the next years really is, how do we get to a place where people trust a centralized property enough, a registry of some kind, a repository, to even begin to think about, will you allow me to send you a notification when you've had a green card for long enough that you're now eligible to naturalize as a US citizen? So while I might sound like I'm stuck in the near term, it's all incremental improvements getting to a better place.
And what a great response to tee up our next question. A theme we've heard throughout all sessions today has been around how sometimes making a small change to a form can be a really big deal, as that affects many different departments or agencies downstream. And so would love to talk about the idea of culture change, as you mentioned, and your experiences in shifting culture, organizational culture, to embrace new approaches to forms, whether that's kind of at that big picture level or even down to how do you convince somebody that that's the way we've always done it, needs to change as a way to improve our forms.
One of the ways we approached this at the Department of Homeland Security just this last year was initiating a burden reduction challenge across the department. There are 8 agencies that are part of the department. Some of them will be familiar to you all: U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Customs and Border Protection, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and a few more that will be familiar to. We proportionately looked at the burden that they put on people through forms and data collections, and that total estimated to be around 190 million hours a year collectively, and challenged the agencies to lower that burden by 20 million hours, which then spurred a movement to look at, can we eliminate forms? Can we eliminate fields on forms? Can we combine forms? Can we look at the processes that these forms are either creating or supporting and re-engineer those processes to not need the forms or to repopulate data or to work other user experience magic and service design efficiencies to lower the burden on the public, which also then lowers the burden on the people on the inside, making those adjudications and vettings and claims decisions, et cetera. We did actually exceed that challenge, by the way. We eliminated 21.5 million burden hours.
That's amazing.
So we're going to try to eliminate another 10 million for the next next year.
That's amazing. Super impressive, and also the power of data. Of being able to measure change, to build buy-in for the work that you're doing. And to Caroline's earlier comment of like, just let me help you fix your form, right? I promise I'm going to save you all this. And to be able to point to that kind of massive scale of change is so wonderful. And we can all use that to help encourage others to do the same. So Dana, that's fantastic. I think from a culture change perspective, another project I worked on when I was in the federal government was, for those of you who are in the United States or have ever applied for a job in the US federal government, there's a website called USA Jobs. And it serves 2 billion people a year. And this was way back in the day. We at the lab were partnered with the owners of USA Jobs, who are wonderful people who have all of the best intentions and are in a challenging position, wrangling 180 something agencies to help hire into the federal government. So this hiring website, I think forms, let's take it out of the traditional notion of what a form is and think about it as an experience, as information and a transaction that we are asking for people to complete as a part of attaining a task. In this sense, hiring, right? I want to apply for a job in the federal government. Well, the federal government's going to ask for information from you to be able to do that. And there's it's not the same as, give us your name and number and an application for getting a driver's license, but it is still, I think, a part of a form. And one of the culture change aspects here that we wanted to set was transitioning from the mindset of designing the experience and what we were asking applicants to do and to fill out from the vantage point of the hiring manager or the federal hiring system. This is what we need. This is what you do. Go through this gate, get through this stage, and then we'll talk to you later. And said, let's flip that on its head and actually design this for the applicant and what their experience is like. If we did that, what would we ask them? What would we show them in response to their information submission? What do they need? All with the end game of making sure it's easier to get quality applicants to apply to the right job, so that the hiring manager gets the right staff person. So we flipped that on its head, which was a big culture shift. And how that looked, and I think this comes back into a forms conversation, is that I think one of the better trends, and Caroline is absolutely expert on forms in this conversation, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, but one of the, I think, better trends in form development is priming. And helping to explain people what is coming, what to expect as you fill out the form, how long will this take, what do you need to have in order to complete these steps? Here's what you need to show up with. And that's one of the things that we did, both from a process perspective, a communication perspective with words, but also a visual perspective of where are you in this process? What else do you need? Here's the things you need to have in advance so that you're ready to just jump in and do this thing. And having the opportunity to speak to hiring the heads of HR all over the federal government to try to help them understand some of this shift was really eye-opening and interesting. And it took a lot to build buy-in and empathy for what this meant and how it was going to actually improve their outcomes as well, that we were working in tandem together to give them what they wanted, even if it didn't look the way they thought it should look, or to be thought of the way it should be, it is traditionally thought of. So, anything in government, when we're saying we want you to think a bit differently, it takes some time. And we did a lot of socialization, a lot of using human-centered design and showing rather than telling the story. And we found that to be incredibly helpful. So it took time, but it did transform part of the experience. I'm not saying that it's a perfect experience and there's definitely more to be done, but it did have a lot of positive impacts to the application process.
I guess I want to speak up for those of us who are like just someone working in a team, like 10,000 ranks below the likes of Dana and Stephanie. So to me, one of the two most powerful things, if you're in a situation where you can persuade people to actually pay any attention to the existing paper forms, then do what I call a run of posts, like make friends with the people in your mailroom who actually open the envelopes. They're lovely people and you'll enjoy it. You might have to get up at 3 a.m. or something because they handle the mail very early in the morning, but get permission from them to actually harvest some forms as they literally come in. Find a way of doing some anonymization if necessary, and then take that raw stuff full of marginalia and people writing in the edges and sending things in that are inappropriate and the wrong stuff coming in. Try and get that stuff into a meeting, preferably with some of the folks who are also lovely, who are actually dealing with the incoming forms. But the people who deal with the incoming forms are often some of the least, they've got high skills, they know what they're doing, but they're not very well paid. And so they can find being in a meeting very intimidating. But armed with some actual filled in forms, that can be incredibly eye-opening. They can say, yeah, this happens all the time. Oh, yeah, we get death threats. We just send them back, or, whatever. I remember a situation where we were told we were going to scan everything that came in the post. And one of the things that came in to this particular tax office was a box of Formula One uniforms. I'm like, why? Oh, well, we have to inspect them to see whether wearing this uniform is a taxable benefit. And I thought, well, how are they going to shove that through my scanner? But it's just an example of the crazy things that can happen. But people write, on paper forms, people write on them, they send letters, they do all sorts of things. And getting people to really understand the richness of the problem can be very, very eye-opening. Now, most of us these days are not actually allowed to engage with the paper. That's why one of the reasons I've been very excited to hear today about people talking about paper again. Fantastic. So really the equivalent for digital experience is to watch people trying to use it, finding circumstances in which you can persuade a manager or someone who's responsible just to come and sit with you while you watch someone trying to fill it in and talking about it. That can be hearts and mind changing. They just didn't realize what people were going through. And people are, even senior managers, unbelievably, are actually quite human often. Many of them are. Dana and Stephanie, for example, are wonderful examples. But even some of the men can actually, they can actually understand when someone is sort of sitting there practically in tears and saying, I need this money for my rent check and I don't know what to do with it. You can be surprised how that experience of being there, watching someone struggle, can really help people to get it, to understand why we're so passionate about it. And like, do the usability testing, do more of it, do more than you can believe, and you won't regret it. Never has someone said to me, oh, I think we did the usability testing too early. Never. They've always said, why didn't we start doing this ages ago? And I just say, well, don't worry, we started doing it now. Yeah,
I'm willing to bet you're going to get a lot of +1s from the audience on that, on usability testing, 100%. Yeah.
I wanted to add an idea that Caroline triggered for me, and that is along with the usability testing and along with the sort of writing along, there's a practice that we've been trying to promote that we call dog fooding, which is basically having those executives fill out the forms for the services that they oversee, which they probably never ever have done themselves. And just that can be pretty eye-opening in the kinds of questions that they have and where they might even find the information to fill in the forms, how long it takes, how burdensome and impenetrable the instructions might be. And so that sort of firsthand experience, even if they're not the intended user, is just, it can be wildly instructive as a culture change catalyst. The rest of it, I would say, definitely plus a million on do the usability testing, do it all the time, do more than you think you can bear, because it will just be so incredibly helpful.
Yeah. And just add to that, like another example, we found that for sure in the USDA project when we actually were redesigning the application, and it was paper-based first, was sitting down with parents who are the ones filling out these forms and watching them, fill out the different versions of forms. And not only did it do what Dana said about, this is a great place to build buy-in, bring people out into the field with you, have them watch this experience, because it humanizes it in a way that really internalizes the need to create change in their heart when their rational mind may have been too busy, bored, tired, stressed to really handle it, right? It brings it into the heart. But I think it also just creates way better outcomes because you're able to see things that you wouldn't otherwise. For instance, watching somebody fill out a form, we would set it down in front of them. We wouldn't tell them what to do because the form would have to stand alone on its own. We aren't going to be there. So let's try to simulate that. Watch them fill out the form. And then when they're done, right, get that feedback, et cetera, as those of you who do design and usability testing know how to do. But it's important to also watch that behavior. I saw a few things floating in the chat around this, and I just want to absolutely plus that because we were able to get to the end of watching somebody fill out the form and they were like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. I can't imagine, it being any better. This is perfect. We're like, thank you. That's great. That's not what we're looking for, right? Like we know there's something else here that could be better. And they were just so overwhelmed. They're like, no, I have nothing else to add. This is just 1,000 times better. And I was like, great. Well, I noticed that you paused at question number 4. And I'm curious what was going through your mind when you paused there. And they're like, well, okay, that's true. Actually, I was confused by these words, blah, blah, blah. Great. Fantastic. Let's talk about that. They were, people forget as they move through these tests, what they think and feel because so much is happening. And so when you can observe the behavior as a designer, as somebody who's out in the field observing, and then come back and ask them about it, you can often find extra goodies that you can improve. So I just wanted to tag in on that.
Love that.
I remember sitting there with an employer. We had this thick wodge of forms that employers had to use. And I promise you, there'd been previously 2 sorts of chunks of forms that were sent. And the minister announced that they'd simplified it by combining them. And the criterion that he used was that the weight of the forms for picking, the physical weight of the forms was less. I'm like, Minister, if you believe the biggest problem with forms is us getting backache of lifting the packet off the doormat, you really don't understand what the issues are. But I took them and they had 15 help cards. Yeah, so I took a pack of forms to an employer and I said, well, okay, tell me what you think about this. And they drew out the help cards and said, well, these help cards are great. And I knew they weren't. I knew that if you actually tried to follow them, you couldn't get the answers. These help cards are great. I'm like, okay, well, just show me which one you've used most recently and which one you like the best. Flip, 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 flip. Oh, yeah, I remember now. I didn't use these ones. I used the ones from the previous year and changed it. So they're really helpful, 15 help cards. They weren't using it all. They were using a handmade version from the previous year, like gold. I would never have got that if I hadn't been in the room with the person. Yeah, we killed them all in the end, all the help cards.
Well, I'd love to give us an opportunity to talk about some big picture takeaways. Today, during our opening, Amanda and Lynn talked a lot about emerging technologies and accessibility as some of the big picture concepts they hope people will take from FormFest today. But I'd love to open it up to you all. What would you like to add as key takeaways that you hope people will leave FormFest with, and importantly, and hopefully implement within their own organizations?
I'm going to go first, and I'm going to say I hope that we'll all feel excited and determined. You know, working in government isn't easy. Often we have to be very prepared to battle through, sometimes for years and decades even. And it's like, let's all celebrate the inspiration we've got from each other and recognize that making these forms better, you know, one form at a time, like fixing the forms one form at a time, really does make life better for people. It's actually incredibly inspiring work, even though it does have its constant frustrations. But, you know, we've heard today some great success stories, but we know that under that, there's been a lot of battles, a lot of hard work, and a lot of determination. So, you know, let's keep that vibe of we're here for each other now. And modern technologies mean that we can be in rooms thousands of miles, kilometers apart, and still really share and learn from each other. I just think that's really thrilling and exciting.
Agreed. I'll add to that that resiliency, right? Inspiration and resiliency, because that's, I think, critical for all innovation work. I think I would add to that a bit about what I was saying in the beginning, which is, you know, ensuring, one, that you are intentional about why you're asking for information and centering that experience from the vantage point of somebody who's filling it in, and doing so in a way that is as inclusive as possible and thoughtfully designed to make that experience as easy for as many people as possible. And to also understand, and I mean, I think we all understand, but to remind ourselves to explain to people the transformative impact at scale that changes to forms can have. And to not overlook it as a, yeah, like I've got bigger problems. It's like, wow, do you understand, you know, concretizing, using data like Dana's example earlier of like, this is the potential of scale of change. The USDA project that I talked about, if anybody's looking for another statistic, the White House wrote an article about it and it's still online in the archives. We were able to save 600 billion, no, gosh, I should have this number. It's been so many years, a lot of money. I think there was a $2 billion deficit because of this form, and we saved at least 600 million in a couple of years just by doing that. And also the ability to get the right people into the program at scale all over the nation, right? By changing the form alone. And I think being able to show that scale and impact is a really great place to start too. If there's a really complex problem and you're having a hard time spinning your wheels about where to start or getting traction or attention, start with something that is a bit more simple and concrete. You're going to generate a lot of measurable change that will build buy-in for you to continue to do work on this issue that may start to move into different service or policy areas. But it'll give you, especially if you're in a nascent place with this in your organization, it's a good place to start because people understand it, you get measurable results, and it can give you a lot of wins that can lead to better change down the road.
Adding on to both Caroline's and Stephanie's points, I'm tempted to go down the road of language access, but I'm going to save that for another conversation. We could do another whole day just about language access and forms, but instead talk about how the specialists in this.
Sorry, Dana, what do you mean by language access?
I mean by not being English specific all the time and making sure that language that forms, fields, and instructions are both in plain language and available in languages other than English, and that help is available in formats that are other than written, because not everyone reads well.
We'll have to do another event.
Okay, I'm in. But what I want to talk about is how there are a lot of specialists in this room who've done a lot of work around forms design and learned a lot about how forms design works. But there are a lot of people in the places where you work who are making forms who are not practiced experts like you are. And the thing that we need to do is to help them do a better job. And there are a lot of tools for doing that. We saw some of them in the demos today, but there's some basic principles of forms design that they may not even realize that there's an entire practice around forms design, that they're just putting fields on a open space. And so making tools and templates available for people so that they can do a better job on their own, I think is going to be crucial to your success and to sort of incremental improvements. And the reason that I think about this is that my team can't possibly do all the forms design that there is to do, even though forms design lives in the office of the CIO at DHS. And those, all of those forms, hundreds of forms across the department, expire every 3 years and need to be updated and need to be assessed and evaluated for their usefulness and whether they are actually collecting the right data. So I think of this, and I think of a story from the times when I was working with the Center for Civic Design. The heads of an election in the state of Ohio called me up saying, we have a new law, we have to implement a form. Can you, would you design the form for us? And I said, I'm really busy right now. I can't actually do that. But here are a couple of examples that you can work from and some guidelines. Take your best shot. And these guys were like, you know, they're policy wonks who work for the governor. And 24 hours later, they brought me back this beautiful form that absolutely was workable, publishable. And all I did was recommend that they do a little bit of usability testing. And as far as I know, that form is still out in the world, and basically the iteration that they created, with the exception of changes to the law. And so I guess empowering folks to do the best possible forms design, one at a time.
To play off of a theme that we're seeing in the chat about the idea of this event being inspirational and motivating and optimistic, as we near the end of our time together, I'd like for the last question to all of you, if you could please share with us some words of inspiration, some closing words of encouragement to the over 2,000 people who have registered for this event as they go forth and work on forms. No pressure, but just something very uplifting and inspiring.
Something super quotable.
Yeah.
Forms are what make government work. They take the place of conversations because conversations don't scale. And so when we look at forms as conversation and policy as code, and you put those things together, we can make a more accessible, more efficient government. And your work as a forms designer, as someone who works on the user experience and the service design of forms and everything that surrounds a form, is crucially important to how public services get delivered.
Yeah, I guess there's not much really in government where you can point to a thing and say, I worked on that thing and it made people's lives a little bit easier. You know, that's one of the things that we can do with forms, is we can say, you know, yeah, what I do is really quite obscure. Nobody understands it. But hey, you know, when you go on gov.uk and you see you've got those round things and they're easier to click on than they used to be, I helped with that. And they think, oh, okay. So it's only a little thing in their lives, but it is just something where those things which are something where maybe that was so hard to do, like a load of very brilliant. The developers had to work on it. It was really, really hard. It took several years. In the end, it's just like a bigger target on a radio button, but it just makes a lot of people's lives that little bit easier. And now whenever I see a big target radio button in a demonstration, I think, yeah, that was great. And so, let's recognize that it can feel very tough. It can feel very different, but we do have the potential to work together to change people's lives for the better. And not that many people can really, go to work every day with that ambition. Yeah, and enjoy it.
Quick story, and then I want to hand to Stephanie because you remind me of this, Caroline. There's a really great documentary about the 2020 election and election officials that ran it in Rhode Island. And my spouse and I were at one of the showings of this documentary, and it's a really compelling movie. It's called No Time to Fail. But I, of course, was looking at the forms. And I was like, I made that.
There you go.
Absolutely. I mean, you will make a difference. Every little step you take every day is moving the ball forward and making big change. And it sometimes doesn't feel that way. And so I'd say, hey, just stop to remind yourself that maybe you got one thing done today, but that one thing was probably harder than most people in other non-government jobs, and like to pat yourself on the back for that. And that working on forms, as is working on any kind of service design effort, I think in government, is an opportunity. That forms have been barriers in the past. When we think about the conversation between residents and community and government, those forms as often have been a barrier. And how do you think about flipping that into an enabler of community, of engagement, of changing the expectations people have around what government experience can be? I mean, you have the ability to change the narrative around expectations of government and keep going, and to not only be a champion internally and externally, but really inside yourself, and keep yourself going, keep yourself filled, and practice that self-care, because if you aren't the one making the change, there's not a lot of people out there that are going to do it. So we need you, and keep going.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and to everyone for being part of today's closing keynote session. Again, a theme has been, for this whole event, celebrating and recognizing the importance that forms play. And I can think of no three better people to close out today than having Dana, Caroline, and Stephanie join us. So special thanks to them. This also does mark the end of FormFest.
I thought we should throw confetti up.
Yeah, we should have brought that with us.
We should have shredded a bunch of forms and then thrown it up.
Oh, that would have been great. That would have been great.
Well, if you have stayed this long, we want to thank you all for joining the first ever international gathering all about government forms.
And we are hopeful that given the attendance numbers for today, again, more than 2,000 people strong, that FormFest will become an annual event so we can continue to nerd out together about how we can make these essential entry points to government service even more effective.
And that's where we need your help. So if you haven't done so yet, please do use that link that's going to be dropped in the chat here to provide feedback on how we can improve FormFest based on your perspective. And of course, it wouldn't be FormFest if we didn't ask you to fill out a form. So please let us know what you think.
And we hope that you stay in touch. My organization, the Digital Service Network, offers monthly events, albeit much smaller than this one, on digital government topics. And you can also check out our resource library for digital service job descriptions, case studies, policies, and more.
And over at Code for America, we are gearing up for our annual summit. As a friendly reminder, a call for proposals is open now until November 14th. So if you were inspired by something today or you want to talk more forms, please consider submitting an idea for a breakout session or a lightning talk. We'd love to hear from you, and we very much hope to see you at Summit this spring.
And so with that, we are going to log off. We want to, again, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at another event. And thank you for all of your great work that you do to deliver essential services using forms.
Thanks, everyone.